Welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with...
I'm Marquines. Cheers.
And I'm Maria, for those who are maybe watching us for the first time.
It happens.
It happens, it still happens. Today we're going to be talking about overworking a piece.
Right.
And more specifically, overworking versus pushing the piece forward in order to simplify.
Yes, so they don't want to overwork the overworked.
Correct. And then how do we work with the fear and then continue working instead of coming up short?
Interesting point. So if I understand you correctly...
Let's do one at a time. Let's not just unpack them one at a time.
Okay, fine.
So how do we keep pushing the work, but we don't slip into the overworking? We're actually pushing the work forward in order to simplify and make it better.
Of course.
By doing that, yes.
To make it more whole or unified.
Mm-hmm.
Much to be said here, but I'll start.
And I'm sorry, overworking is also about, when we say overworking the piece.
Yes.
Let's start with that. What does overworking the piece mean?
An interesting phenomena that most artists out there will understand, Maria, is what happens in the opening statement. When we make an opening statement in a painting. I have a lot of conversations with artists about the beginning, middle, and end phase of a painting, which is a longer conversation, but it's useful. And almost to the artist, they talk about how fresh things look in the beginning. Most people out there will know exactly what I'm talking about. You get off to this, you're blocking in the big colors, you're making big moves. Some of them are gestural. You know, you're kind of just freewheeling it for the most part, a lot of artists. And they step back and they look at that opening statement and they go, wow, this is so fresh, it's so vital. Can I maintain this?
Yeah, it's not done.
It's not done, but they like what they see.
Yeah.
So we have to start there. That opening statement is oftentimes we fall in love with it. And then, of course, we have to make all the decisions afterwards, like, okay, well, what needs to be worked on? What changes do I have to make in this piece? What corrections or adjustments do I have to make? And in the middle phase, so the opening phase is the opening phase. And that's that. Then when we get into the middle phase, things start to make a little sense to the artist, and they have to start picking and choosing what moves to make to push it along. Okay, and it starts to coalesce. And oftentimes the middle phase is a time of confusion, because they like where they're going, but they're already starting to lose some of that early freshness in the opening statement. Right? Yeah. You all understand.
I'm hoping that some of you are like, oh yes.
Oh, I think a lot of them are, oh yes. But then you get through the middle phase, and you know, after making whatever adjustments and corrections you feel the piece needs, now you're moving towards the end phase. But the risk here now is that in the middle phase, too many things got loaded up. Yeah. And I encounter this, Maria, a lot with the artists that I'm now working with in our mentorship program. It gets loaded up, especially near the end of the middle. And now what happens is you got a precious area here, a precious area there. And I've seen many times lots of little precious areas. Something's got to give. Something's got to go. It's getting too busy, not just with too many elements of all sorts, because you can have a complicated design. Right. But you want a hierarchy of importance in the elements. So that's usually what I encounter in working with artists and see. Now it's loaded up and they're like, oh my God, I can't get rid of this area. I can't change this. And they don't know where to go.
And they invested a lot of work and time into them.
And that's a huge part of it. Exactly. The more time, the more energy that you've invested, the less likely you are to make some necessary changes and to give it up, as we say. So that's our predicament. Yeah. That takes us to where your question began.
Right.
What now?
So now we have to keep working, we have to keep pushing, but instead of keep on suffocating it,
we're adding more precious areas.
Adding more.
Yes. More icing on the cake. Right. They just keep adding more icing on the cake until you have too much icing and not enough cake.
Yeah. Then what?
So what I advise artists is to learn how to read their work. If they can start to learn how to read their work, Maria, they'll have an idea of what they want to do. Otherwise, they just get overwhelmed. So how do we do that? The first thing I teach is how to read the work between left and right half of the piece for balance. It's very simple. You close one eye, use your hand, and you look at the right half of the piece, and then you look at the left half of the piece. And you do that a few times. That will help the artist determine which half is stronger than the other, which half has areas worth keeping. Is the right half too loaded up? Is the left half too weak? And so they start to look at left and right half as paintings. And they'll say, oh, I love the right half, but the left half needs some work to make it integrate into the whole. They can also do that with upper half and lower half, although that works better with landscape pieces, but they can still do it. And then they're starting to look at more objectively, you see. Then eventually, they can start to read the quadrants, which is also very useful. And so they're using their hands in this fashion. Upper right, they close one eye, take a look, upper left, then they look at the lower right this way, and they look at the lower left this way, at a distance. They'll start to find out, is there a quadrant that's really in trouble? It's too loaded up, or it's too weak. In other words, seeing the piece objectively. Not to mention turning it upside down, which also helps them see it objectively. And that's what we're really after. How can I see the piece more objectively to figure out, okay, there is a precious area here, but it has to go, or it has to be diminished. It has to be pushed back a little bit. Does that help? Do you make sense to you? And
Yes.
I hope to the audience here?
So you're saying, okay, this is the moment to really look. Maybe stop working
Absolutely.
and take a long look. So
Absolutely.
give yourself some time to talk to your piece.
And have it talk to you.
And then I'm guessing the next step would be to simplify somehow, right?
Yes, and that leads us into this conversation about hierarchy, which is very important, and directional movement, which
Okay.
they're connected.
And we talk about this a lot in the language of design course.
Yes, we
so
do.
I feel like
We won't go into the nuts and bolts of it.
right, but I just want to explore that idea of, like overworking versus pushing in order to simplify,
Exactly.
right?
So the artist, in looking at this piece, Maria, and they're trying to read it, as I said, as best they can, the ultimate decision that they have to decide, that what they have to decide on is, what areas do I really love and what areas are expendable? In other words, if everything is important in the piece, then nothing becomes important.
Right.
And if everything, all the elements or areas are yammering for our attention, the viewer will get overwhelmed. It becomes cacophony. It's like an orchestra where all the instruments are playing full blast. That's not good for the piece. So we want literally an orchestration where some areas are really going to grab our attention and other areas are quieter, softer, more open, perhaps more atmospheric, perhaps pushed back into space a little bit, and other areas are coming forward. That's when the artist can begin to explore. And there are different ways to do that. Through glazing, through scraping, through sanding.
Right.
It,
But again, I want to reel you back into the emotional aspect
Oh.
of that moment.
Oh, boy.
Yes, there are tools and techniques, right,
Yes.
to get you through.
Yes.
But I think it's also about recognizing that moment
Yes.
in the process.
Right.
And then how do we act? How do we,
Right.
how do we also go past the fear
Yes.
of, oh, now what, right?
Okay.
Now I don't want to lose these areas. I already lost what I had. I might mess it up even more.
Yes.
How do we face these moments emotionally as
Yeah.
artists, not just technically?
I'm glad you brought me back to that point. So what I would tell my students at the California College of the Arts, where I taught painting for many years, is the following. I would say to them, look, folks, I'd rather you overwork a number of pieces and learn through that difficult realization that I've overworked it, now I've either killed it or it's not working.
Yeah.
I'd rather them do that a number of times and learn through that process rather than come up short because they're afraid to push it and go to the next place. So we start with courage. We start with courage and a willpower.
Right.
Like, I've got nothing to lose. Let me see what happens if I do X.
Or I have something to lose, but I have to be okay with that risk.
Even better. I have something to lose, but I'm going to take a risk here, and I'm going to sand it back or do whatever I need to do, and I'm going to lose it or I'm going to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But I also add to my advice to my painters out there and the students, one of my favorite quotes from Agnes Martin. There are actually two. One is, she said that the bad paintings have to be painted. Mm-hmm. So that's learning through those difficult moments, just learning, okay. But the other one, she says, and this is really a good one, the so-called mistakes or missteps are just the next step to the next thing.
Right.
Now that is a great attitude. I incorporate that attitude a lot still after all these years of working. The so-called missteps are just the next step to the next thing. Now the mindset, since we're going to the emotional aspect of this for you folks, now the mindset is, let me see. What if?
Yeah.
As Sean Scully says, why this and not that?
Right.
Now you're in an inquisitive mode. And okay, I get rid of this precious area, or I push it back a little bit or quiet it down. Oh, that's working. Oh, that's not working. Now what?
Right.
So then it becomes a process.
Yes, I feel that artists, especially beginners, will be happy and satisfied with an underworked piece because there's like, oh, this looks really good. As you said, it looks fresh, and I know that I can, put one dot on the canvas and it's done because it's allowed, it's okay.
Yep.
So they will stop there, right? And say, okay, this is good enough.
Yes.
I know it's acceptable. It's acceptable in the art world. It's acceptable for me because I just had an opening statement that I'm okay with.
Yes.
And then they stop.
Yes.
And I believe that, okay, for some, maybe that's okay as well. I think that also what people don't understand is that behind a simplification like that from the great artists, there were thousands of paintings that they, as you said, overworked, had to get rid of, learn from them, and then really synthesize, yes, all of that, like summarize it and have that one sentence, visual sentence that they put on a canvas as like, you feel the weight behind it.
Yes.
But I also feel that a lot of artists put that sentence and it's just the beginning sentence. It doesn't have that weight behind it because it doesn't come from that process of overworking, struggling, doing all of that to come to this point, right? And so this is kind of where I'm trying to put it out there that there are two ways, that there is a balance between being fearful and stopping versus being brave and pushing it forward in order to go back, quote unquote, right? To simplify, to get the essence out of it.
Yes.
And for some it's easier, and for some it does require a little bit more more work.
Yes. And as you're speaking, I'm thinking about the two ends of a spectrum in terms of people, artists, and also their work. At the one far end, you have the Zen master,
right,
who can make a move or two and that's it, and they step back, and less is more. Right?
Right.
If you look, for instance, at certain Chinese scrolls where they have maybe just a bird and a branch, and then the rest of it is just empty space. That bird and branch was executed beautifully quickly, and maybe it took them just a matter of moments, and now it's done, and it's masterful.
Matter of moments and probably decades of work.
Well, that's your point, yes. And I used to look at Robert Motherwell's collages, just to cite one example, as a young artist, in the beginning, and I was really taken by how little he would do to say a lot. That's masterful, and you're right, that takes practice and time. At the other end of the spectrum are artists who can create incredibly complex and rich designs that are very complicated. I'm thinking about the Garden of Delights. Remind me of the artist, please. Just drew a blank.
Bosch.
Yes, Hieronymus Bosch. Very complicated works. And yet when you step back from them, they seem very complete and very whole. They seem very unified. That too takes an enormous amount.
Is it Bosch or Bruegel? Now you got me confused.
Well, no, those are two. But Bruegel also, another great artist for you folks out there. Bruegel is amazing. He creates these incredibly complex designs and yet really unified. I mean, how does he do that? So those are the two ends of the spectrum, you see, because sometimes less is less.
I'm also thinking of the contemporary artist in California, Chester Arnold.
Yes. Chester Arnold,
incredibly
really rich and complex designs and lots of details. So that's your spectrum. So what are we saying to the artists out there? You have to be the judge. Based on your activities, based on your sensibilities, based on the artists that you look at, respect and admire and perhaps emulate and learn from and connect with. So it becomes subjective. But what I would say here is what I always try to remind my students and artists. My feeling is never be satisfied with something that's okay and it gets by. You know, I would constantly say to my students, they would bring a painting before me, we would discuss it together, and I would say to them, are you really happy with this? Are you feeling like you've given it everything you can? My mentor Irma used to say, Mark, you need to spend loving attention, how did she put it? You need to have loving attention throughout every square inch of that canvas, whether it's complex or simple. And I always remembered her words. Yeah, so I think the artists have to be honest with themselves at the end of the day. Like, is this my very best or can I do better?
Okay, well, I would leave it with that message. It's just an invitation for thinking, an invitation for maybe some self-reflection and being honest with yourself as you're standing in front of your piece. Am I ready to push this forward in order to simplify it, make it better, make it stronger, or am I just fearful and I would rather leave it underworked than maybe take a step further?
That's well said. And I would add one last note, and that is, I think, very important. The passage of time really helps. So looking at something, we can fall in love with what we did this day or this week, or maybe even this month, but keep looking at it, and the passage of time, I think, is super important for the artist to take a look and go, I think I can get back in there and do a little bit better. I can give it up. All right.
Good luck.
I hope this helps a little bit.
Work hard and
have fun, always.
Always.
All right. Ciao.